Well, good morning or afternoon, perhaps, and welcome again to this special edition of Tuesdays with Lloyd's. My name is Pat Talley, Regional Director and Managing Agent Practice Group Leader for Lloyd's in the U.S. Today will be the third and final installment this week of our special cyber series. Next week, we'll continue with part two of the series from 11 o'clock to 11:20 Eastern next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Today, we move our focus to the topic of claims and underwriting working together. Please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box during the discussion. And don't forget that all of our sessions are recorded on our YouTube channel to allow viewing later on demand. So let's jump right in by introducing today's panel of experts. Courtney Davis Curtis, Assistant Vice President of Risk Management and Resilience Planning at University of Chicago. Matthew Waller, Underwriting Manager with Tarian Underwriting Limited, and James Berry, Claims Manager with Tarian Underwriting. So, Courtney, Matt, James, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Tuesdays with Lloyd's, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Pat, for that introduction and providing us with the opportunity to facilitate this important discussion today. I think this topic is so incredibly timely given the current market and claims conditions related to network security, privacy, liability, and cyber. The conversation today with James and Matt will concentrate on underwriting and claims, but I think it is critical for all parties involved to really have an appreciation of this. So that is the broker, that is risk managers and others on the client side, including CISOs. I think this discussion will go really brief, but we hope to go deep enough to give a lot of key takeaways as you think about how you can navigate the current landscape. And we do endeavor to leave time for questions on the end as well. But let's dive in and get started by creating a foundation to talk a little bit more about the threat landscape. James, would you start us off by talking a little bit about the front line of defense?
Yes, thank you, Courtney. I mean, in terms of how a claim plays out, cyber has the benefit of being extremely short tail, and so it's increasingly more important that the claims professionals, the vendors that are used, and the insureds and brokers are all working in unison together and communicating at the same time. I think the threat emergence has changed over the last 18 months to 2 years. There's various examples of that in terms of ransomware developing into ransomware exfiltration, and so really and truly the claims is the front end of where the insurance product comes to play here. And in terms of how we interact with underwriting is the driver for all things going forward.
Thank you for that, James. I certainly agree. And more now than ever, we're seeing these type of events make media and grab a lot of attention. And so I think this conversation, again, is very timely. Matt, I'd love to hear from you about how this kind of translates a little bit into some of the underwriting considerations.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, Courtney. And thanks, James. So I think, in insurance, claims is always informing underwriting, right? Like where the wind blows or the earth shakes, you're informing your decisions on underwriting and pricing based on that. And that doesn't change no matter really the product. But the cyber market, as James highlighted, is in such a dynamic state of flux that is really critical in our market specifically to be engaged with all the stakeholders that are involved. And one of the key ones from an underwriting side is claims. And the way we do that at Tarian and the market generally is kind of twofold. First is informing our question set. So again, James highlighted, over the last 18 to 24 months, obviously ransomware has been a big trend. And as a result, the market's come out with ransomware supplemental questions that have informed the underwriting decisions to make sure risk selection is at the heightened level. But that's constantly changing, right? So you had the origination of ransomware, but then we saw the emergence of exfiltration. And engagement with your claims departments is critical, as well as your clients, and understanding that it's not just prevention, but also going kind of full circle within the world of insurance cyber underwriting, understanding data and information as well, and how that's being protected. Because now, over 80% of ransomware events, they're actually exfiltrating your information as well. So the front end is informing your underwriting question set, which we think is hugely important, and from a Lloyd standpoint, critical to the underwriting process. But then the other really interesting part, given the dynamics of the cyber market, is obviously the development of the number of insurtechs out there and getting the immediate threat feeds into your underwriting information. So it's kind of the qualitative approach where James and I are lucky enough to sit together at Tarian, and we can kind of, spitball ideas on how to inform our underwriting decisions and how to better improve that process. But now you're seeing that real-time feed of information come into the underwriting. And I think that dynamic is hugely important to the market and the cyber market generally. And understanding exactly how those dynamics are changing, whether that's by industry sector, size of client, will help inform the underwriting process from a data standpoint to continue to improve how we're building a sustainable underwriting approach into the cyber market.
Thank you for that. James, hearing some of Matt's commentary, how do you bring this all together to include some of those other parties that I mentioned, whether we're talking the broker or the client, in addition to claims and underwriting?
Well, I think, look, this is where the value comes in the product you're buying. The claim side really is the proof in the pudding, so to speak. From my perspective, our job is, hopefully to be told that something's gone wrong very early, and if not as soon as it's gone wrong. And it allows us the ability to assess who are the key stakeholders in terms of the communication chain. For me, my job is very much to understand where the insured is, what the problem is, and what they're looking to do, working with the insured hand in hand and the broker to identify those key relationship partners in terms of the remediation effort. And that would be, breach counsel, IT forensics, notification agents if required. Now, these events take all different shapes, sizes, and forms. And, in terms of when we do get notified and when we don't, there's different stories to be told there. But really and truly, from the claims perspective, working with your underwriting team to provide this product and provide this service, it's the glue that holds it all together. And I think that's what, the insureds are purchasing, that responsiveness and that level of experience to be able to respond to these matters when they're notified, efficiently and quickly with an educated decision.
Thank you. You made a comment here that I just want to emphasize very briefly, is that although we're hearing like events happening, each really necessitates a separate type of response. And so that leads me to believe that the preparation you do even pre-event is just as important. So I want to go a little bit deeper with that, about how can claims and underwriting work together to develop risk management procedures before an event even begins. Matt, how important is that to, adding onto the layers of appreciating the threat landscape?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And, I think if you think of the product life cycle, generally, if you're approaching the insurance market, you're looking to buy the coverage, right? And so the first point of call is talking to your broker and then in turn your underwriter. But at that front end of the underwriting process, we can have a lot of engagement based on the information that we're learning from the claims departments and our vendors to help that discussion evolve and improve the risk profile of the risk. But, as an underwriter, I can give you price and I can give you terms and conditions. But I think just as important in this market, which will help the sustainability of the market, is understanding what best risk practices should be implemented. And we've done a good job of that as a market with, again, as I highlighted earlier, the ransomware supplements. But it's continuing to evolve those processes, and getting more touch points earlier in the underwriting process will only help us in the long term understand the risk profiles.
Yeah, I think, I alluded to that. It's a two-way street, Matt, as well. When we underestimate the importance of the conversations we have after, during the underwriting process and just after pre-loss. And so it's very much on, my account is very much, driven by those conversations from the underwriting team as to what they were thinking and what they're aiming to do with these policies and when they're deploying them. So it does factor into the claims response.
I'd be curious to know, because sometimes risk managers and potentially brokers too think that you're working up to getting your coverage, right? So all the work happens up at the front, and I'll see you next year as we have these conversations again. How does this happen? Should this be an ongoing dialogue with claims and underwriting really throughout the term to work towards these? So it's not just a stop once you get your coverage or start once you get your claim?
Yeah, do you want me to? I'm happy to go there. I think we'd be fools not to continually engage. As Matt alluded to, and I alluded to at the beginning yourself, there's it's continually changing. There's how we deal with claims, the type of claims we face, the questions that we're asking during underwriting, the considerations that are made. as Matt said, there's continual change in the marketplace. So if that engagement between claims and underwriting stops, I think we're arguably missing a trick collectively from an insured perspective, from a broker's perspective, and from the insurer's perspective as to what we're trying to provide here.
Absolutely. I'm going to throw in a new question here for you too, in terms of this perspective that we're talking about and this advanced outreach. Do you see this level of engagement in being important, no matter the sophistication of the client or risk that you're dealing with? Because I suspect that some of this is a bit more challenge for some organizations versus others. So how do you change your claims and underwriting dynamics to meet different types of clients' needs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can jump in with that one. So I think there's kind of two angles, obviously, on the outreach side, and it does vary by client, quite frankly. And, again, talking to the insurtech world, we were starting to see those developments on, vendor vulnerabilities coming in and more customer outreach on an automated basis, which I think adds a lot of value to those smaller business customers. We're talking about around what we at Tarian do, which is the larger business and larger clients. Ongoing conversations, early doors that James already mentioned are critically important, developing those incident response plans and having those dynamics of setting up the vendor panels. So I think there's a bit of nuance to it. It's not a kind of a one size fits all, just like no client is the same. But what we have identified as a market and is that customer engagement is critical, and that can take a number of different ways and approaches, just like it does, in other markets like the property market with your assessment. So I think there's understanding that it's not a one size fits all approach, but collaboration and answering the customer and insured's needs is going to be critical to that process.
Yeah, and I think there's insureds respond in different ways, as we all do as human beings, to these events when they happen, right? This is, sadly for the most part, this is the worst time in a business's life when one of these events happen, and so people come at it in different ways. And if that outreach, encourages people to communicate more and earlier and not be fearful about, essentially opening the doors to what's happening in terms of their fears and what they wanted to do, I think ultimately it's a good thing. Because the quicker we get over that hump, the quicker we can get onto, fixing things.
Absolutely. I'm going to pull in a question that's kind of come up from our audience here as well. And hopefully you can see this to have a little bit of a preview. But as the cyber risk threats change so quickly, how do underwriters have enough data sets to these quickly changing claims in order to price coverage appropriately in such a dynamic environment?
Sure. Yeah, I think that ties more into the underwriting side of things. So I'm happy to answer that. Again, Tarian's recently been purchased by Corvus, and we're going through a merger there. So I think that highlights on, again, where the insurtech space is playing. And those live data feeds are really playing into, and it's really exciting for us to see how that threat feeds are now feeding into dynamic information on what vulnerabilities are out there. And again, that ties into industry sector or size of business, and having more data volumes informs our underwriting process to better price and adjust for the risk profiles. It also increases our ability to outreach to those clients in the event there is a vendor vulnerability or something along those lines, like Log4j. We can go be dynamic in our approach there based on the data sets and the data fields that we're seeing to say, all right, insured A, what are you doing from a best practice standpoint? How can we improve the situation? And how does that better price your insurance policy as a result?
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget as well how relatively young cyber is in comparison to some of the more traditional lines of business. So, absolutely. and that sort of age gap is not only, it is an incredibly exciting thing and a good thing, but it increases the value of MI, and everything you can get is important at the moment because things are changing that fast.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking that one a bit on the whim. We've talked a little bit about the threat landscape and the importance of advanced outreach and this collaboration. If you were to leave one or two remarks for your claims and underwriting colleagues, or that you really want them to get these salient points from coming from our discussion, what would those be? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, again, it's collaboration. I think, thinking as your insurance is part of the onboarding process to manage your cyber risk. So the underwriting and claims side of the business on insurance are always talking along with our vendors. But as an insured or one of our clients, remember that, your insurance is there we have very informed decisions, number of data points and a lot of conversations going on that are helping us build the best practices to help you in that time of need potentially for a response process. So you can call a guy like James and he can help you out within those first 48 hours and say, here's what to do. But by collaborating early doors, it'll help insureds in the long term be in a better position to respond.
Yeah, for me, I think, it's along the lines of, Matt, if you've taken the time to invest in cyber insurance, and it isn't necessarily as straightforward as it used to be nowadays, take the time to understand how it responds and who you're talking to. You're buying in your time of need. You're buying experience. You're buying expertise. You're buying a response package to a degree, in terms of when the coverage is engaged there. And so it's, for me, would be go one step further than once you've purchased. Understand who you're going to be speaking to when that moment comes.
Thank you. I would agree with that completely. When I think about the realm of insurance policies that I purchase on behalf of the organizations that I represent, some are to make our organization whole, some are to make someone else whole. And in the combination of those two, some of them are to help us access resources which we may not be able to utilize ourselves or be able to leverage when we need them. And so importantly, that early collaboration, that early outreach are really critical to being able to be as nimble and quick and responsive as some of these type of events require us to be. So we have just a few minutes here, and I know we've already addressed one question, but I would like to open it up again to the audience to use the chat function or simply use the Q&A as well to raise another question. And I see one has just come through here. So it's somewhat related to our discussion here, so please feel free to pass it off, but they're more specific from an underwriting perspective. Do you think that sublimited or co-insured ransomware coverage is here to stay? And again, to the extent you feel comfortable responding to that, I open that up to you.
Yeah, I can touch on it. I mean, I think, as a market, we need to be providing solutions to our insureds and clients. And, if you're insured, you want to be buying the coverage that meets your needs. So I think we as a market need to look at what they're asking for. And if that is sublimited or co-insurance coverage to reduce costs, then we can engage on that. But if they're looking for full limits of those sort of coverages, then we have to also consider how do we price for that accordingly, but also make sure that the risk management's in place to help mitigate what potential exposure there could be for us. So again, I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. We as a market can be dynamic around that. But the most important part is to meet our insured's needs and to be engaging on that process.
Would you, this will be our last question, would you say that these collaborations between underwriting and claims, the advanced outreach and appreciation of the threat landscape can help inform the future of this market by having a deeper level of discussion versus what some may assume is the traditional process to insurance purchase and claims mitigation?
Do you want me to take that, Matt?
Sure, yeah, go for it, James.
I'll jump in as usual. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes hand in hand, as I said before. I think this is, I don't want to say cutting edge. I think it's common sense, right? If we're trying to address customers' needs or insured's needs, whatever we want to call them, and we're trying to help brokers do that at the same time, I think we need to hear each other out, and I think we need to understand how what our drivers are and how we operate and how we do what we do, and how insurers operate. We don't want to put ourselves into an insured's boots and say we want to run their business, but we want to provide them with a product that caters to their needs. And I think the only way you do that is by listening and educating yourself from what you're seeing. And I think, it's been the last 3-4 years have been educating, I think, everyone in cyber, in the sense that, there's been a variety of different shapes and forms of ransomware coming through. And I'm sure it will continue to develop, and it's inherent on all of us to learn from this and to use that to make, the product we provide and the service we provide better. And that, that isn't necessarily, typified by sublimits or limiting coverage here and there. It's enhancing what we offer.
Absolutely.
I still think, and as James started with, we're still a relatively young market and we have a lot to learn, and we're getting more and more information, and we're seeing improvements on, the negotiation tactics with the threat actors, and we're seeing some of the government organization, government stepping in to help alleviate those concerns. And I think collaboration across all those areas will help evolve the market, will help evolve the product, and put us in a better position in the next year or two and for the future. Because quite frankly, what we have identified is that the cyber market is here to stay, the product's here to stay. It's just making it fit for purpose now and making sure that it's here for the long term.
I think that's an excellent way to summarize our discussion and to conclude things today. Thank you both so much for your remarks. Pat, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much. Yes, and what a fascinating discussion. I'm sorry that it's so brief, but thank you again, panel, for sharing your time and expertise with us. And that will do it for us today and for the week, actually. Be sure to join us next week for 3 more editions of our special cyber series. Tuesday's topic will be demystifying business interruption. Please take a moment to answer the survey questions that will appear in your browser. And until next week, Lloyd's thanks you for staying in touch, and have a great rest of your day.